With a month left in the regular season, the Detroit Lions clearly control their destiny as they continue to go on to try and get the number one seed. But the fine line they're going to have to walk is absolutely razor thin. We're going to talk about it, so stay tuned.
What are we? What makes us what we are and what we're going to be? It's grit. It's what we started with last year, guys. Doesn't matter if you have one ass cheek and three toes. I will beat your ass.
Can definitely compete with the big dogs.
10-5 end zone touchdown Detroit Lions.
You guys are unbelievable, man. I'm telling you.
We are driven by Detroit.
Hello, Detroit Lions friends and family members. Welcome on back to yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. I'm your host, David T. Pike. And as always, we're diving on in. My friends, we've now gotten to that point in the year where it's like, okay, we can realistically now start talking not only just about playoffs because, well, one, the Lions have already secured their spot, as we, well know, but we can now realistically start talking about, hey, when are we going to secure the division title again? How and when are we going to secure the number one seed spot? Because at this point, we've already checked off one box. Get back to the playoffs. That box has already been checked off. We are clinched. We are going to the playoffs. So that is good. However, though, that is just the first step of a number of goals that the Lions have this year. With the ultimate goal, obviously, of get to a Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl. The next goal, obviously, is repeating as division champions. And then the next goal after that is to get the number one seed going into the playoffs. Now, that's all well and good. We can talk about, the fact that that's what we're after, but how do we do it? When are we most likely to achieve these things? That is where we start running into a bit of I guess you could kind of say a conundrum, because there's a number of ways that this whole thing can play out. And the reason why is because there is such a tight race across the top of the NFC conference, which is which is a little bit peculiar because over the last couple of years, the NFC has not exactly been the strongest conference. Actually, the AFC has. But what's funny is this year there is much more of a spread, if you will, between the teams in the AFC that have the top, records versus the NFC. When you take a look at the NFC, there's at least 3 or 4 teams that are vying in that spot to try and get, maybe the number one seed. Now, I'll say this. The Lions clearly have the number one heavy-handed favorite to get that spot. But that doesn't mean they are totally without competition. Clearly, we already know that the Vikings are still trying to vie for that. We know that the Eagles are vying for that. And whether or not we really want to admit it, even though we've beaten the Packers twice, the Packers are not out of possibly getting that seed. They're nearly out of it, but they're still not done. So there are a couple of teams in the NFC that are still vying for that spot. And as I just clearly stated, the Vikings and the Packers, they're also still vying to try and get the division title from us. The Packers, again, much like with the number one seed, they're pretty much almost out of it, but that doesn't mean that they are completely. The Vikings, on the other hand, they are right on our freaking ankles. They are nipping at our ankles. So, let's take a look-see at this conversation here, because I believe that it is time that we actually start having this conversation. Now, I'm going to be honest. Some of these numbers may have changed from when I looked this information up, because I looked this information up prior to some of the contests on Sunday. But the numbers should still pretty much be within the same area. They might not be 100% accurate, but again, this is also based upon different betting odds. It's based upon different, betting sources and a whole bunch of other stuff, so it's not going to be 100% accurate even if I had the most up-to-date information. But let's take a look at this. Like I said, Lions have already clinched the playoffs. But what is the possibility, what is the chance that the Lions are going to repeat as the NFC North champions? The best place I've been able to find this is that there is about an 81 to 85% chance as it stands right now that the Lions will be able to repeat as NFC North Division champions, which, let's call it for what it is. The Lions, realistically, all they have to do is win against, our last two division opponents, and we have that one locked up. Because if we realistically want to think about it here, we only have the Bears game left, and we have the Vikings game left. Now, I'm going to be entirely honest. Out of those two games, I am a lot more comfortable with the Vikings game at home than I am with the Bears game on the road. And the only reason is because the Bears are still a tough opponent. And on top of that, again, it is going to be outdoors. And the one thing about the freaking outdoors that I don't like compared to being inside of a dome is that, number one, we play in a dome more often than we play outside. That doesn't mean we can't play outside. We've already proven that this year. But at the same time, Chicago is probably one of the most inhospitable places to play this damn late in the year. So that's the only reason why I'm a little bit more comfortable with the Vikings game at home than I am with the Bears game on the road. Now, like I said, 85% chance somewhere in that ballpark to repeat as the NFC North champions. That's what I'm seeing from most betting odds sites. Also, as we clearly know, the Lions are also considered the heavy favorites to win the NFC number 1 seed going into the playoffs. Depending upon what site you go to, what betting site, whatever the case might be, you're going to get a very wide range of different answers. But the best thing I can say is I went to Athletic. Athletic, I think, has us at like just a little bit over 50%, 52, 53%, something like that. ESPN currently has us at like 68, almost 70%. And again, these numbers are going to fluctuate all the damn time. But the point of the matter is that the Lions clearly are the number 1 odds to get the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. Okay, that's again boding well for the Lions. And then to kind of put the cherry on top, the pièce de résistance, the crème de la crème, the Lions also have the highest odds to not only get to a Super Bowl, but to win the Super Bowl this year. Currently, I think their odds of getting to a Super Bowl are around 33, 35% right now, which is ridiculously high because most teams are not even in that high of a ballpark. And then they're also the highest odds to win the Super Bowl this year at about 30%. So it's like, okay, everything right now is kind of looking like it's on cruise control for the Lions because it's like, hey, continue to win, control your destiny, let's close out the remainder of the season. And I'm going to say this right now. That's all well and good. Hey, it sounds great. We've got all these high chances of securing these things. The NFC North Division title again, getting the number 1 seed in the NFC, getting to a Super Bowl, winning a Super Bowl. All of the odds are stacked in our favor at this current moment. But how do we get there? I just explained what the odds are, but how do we get to those odds? How do we actually secure those odds? That's where things get very, very dicey. That's why I said in the very beginning of my episode here, it is a very, very razor-thin line that the Lions are going to have to walk in order to make this work. And the reason why, unfortunately, as much as I hate to say it, it's because of the damn Vikings and because of the damn Eagles. They are just not going away. Now, I'll say this. The Eagles have been put on scare alert the last 2 weeks because the last 2 weeks they have barely edged out opponents. And let's call it for what it is. The last opponent they played was the freaking Carolina Panthers. Not a particularly good team, but the Panthers went toe-to-toe with the Eagles. So again, I'm going to say this right now. I have a funny feeling that the Eagles, even though they're winning, in contrast to where they were last year when they were limping their way into the playoffs, there are cracks that are starting to show within that freaking foundation yet again. But when we take a look at the fact that the Eagles and the freaking Vikings are hanging around, they're making it difficult for us to secure the spot to get the number 1 seed, that then means that the Lions are going to have to walk a very thin tightrope to actually make sure they can secure the freaking, number 1 seed going into the playoffs. Because I took a look at it. Based on my estimates from, the fact of looking at the remaining games, taking a look at what the freaking Vikings have left, taking a look at what the Eagles have left, based upon my estimates, the earliest that the Lions could probably secure the number 1 seed would probably be Week 16 at the Bears. That's probably the earliest they could secure it. So not this game coming up against the Bills. It would have to be at least about another week or two before we could realistically start talking about that. But, like I said, I'm not as comfortable as I am with the Bears game as I am with the Vikings game. So here's why I think that the game that the Lions will actually secure the number 1 seed is probably going to be Week 17. And here's the reason why. Again, as much as I hate to admit it, the Lions are due for another loss here. I'm not saying I expect it. I'm not saying I want it. But I'll say this right now. It is damn hard to go 16-1 in an entirety of a season. It's ridiculously hard. So that's just as it was in the previous model. Let's think about this. I mean, it's hard to just lose one game. It's hard to lose just a couple of games, like 2 or 3. So the way I'm looking at it is at some point, I think the Lions are going to get another loss. Again, I'm not expecting it. I'm not, wanting it. But I just have this itching feeling in the back of my head. It's like, listen, I don't know if we're going to be able to completely sweep out everything before we get to the playoffs. But if we do, great. But I'm also not going to be blindsided by the possibility of it not happening. And I think the most likely team to do that to us is the Bears in Chicago. Now, Week 17, like I said, I think is the best time, the best week that we will have to secure the number 1 seed. Which Week 17 is, again, a good week for us because if I recall correctly, Week 17, I think the Lions are going to be playing the 49ers. Now, because the last game of the year we play is against the Vikings. So, okay, in Week 17, we play the 49ers. The 49ers, they're still vying for a playoff spot, but let's call for what they are. They're banged up. They don't have a whole lot going for them. Yeah, it's still competitive in the NFC West, but the Seahawks just won a big victory against the Cardinals. They've clearly got a game ahead edge over everybody that's right behind them, which is pretty much the Rams at 7-6, and the Cardinals and the 49ers are 2 games out. So it would take a miracle for the 49ers and the Cardinals to even be continuing to stay in the conversation. They would have to hope the Seahawks literally flounder. But my whole point is this. Week 17 game against the 49ers, I think, is when we're going to secure it. But I'm going to say this right now. There are 4 games that are upcoming here that Lions fans, I am telling you, I am imploring you, you would better have your TV turned on for because they are going to have a huge impact on our ability to get the number 1 seed. You want to know what these 4 games are? I'll tell you what they are right now. 2 of them are in Week 15, one's in Week 17, and one's in Week 18. The 2 games that are in Week 15, one of them is involving us. The other one does not. The first game this week we need to pay attention to is the Steelers and the Eagles game. That game is huge, and here's the reason why. If you take a look at the remainder of the Eagles' schedule, they really don't have a whole lot of opponents left that can realistically challenge them very well. The only 2 teams that I think are most likely to challenge them to actually beat them is probably the Steelers, who they're playing this week, and also the Commanders, who they play the very next week in Week 16. So there's a hard possibility that this week the Steelers could beat the Eagles, and then the next week the Commanders could beat the Eagles. And here's the reason why. The Steelers are, I would say this, they're probably one of the biggest surprises this year as far as a positive surprise because everybody thought they had no chance of winning anything. And yet, currently, right now, they're the division winner, not division winner, they're division leaders in the AFC North. And the reason why is because, for all intents and purposes, Russell Wilson has kind of recaptured a little bit of his old form. They've got a ridiculously stingy defense. So, okay, the Steelers have got all that going for them, and then the Eagles, like I just said, they've had a bit of a tough out the last couple of weeks where they've not exactly put out their best foot against some really mediocre opponents. So that, I think, is a huge game for us Lions fans that we really need to watch because if the Steelers can beat the Eagles, that's going to do massive, massive dividends for us getting to that division, getting us that number 1 seed. So that's the first game we need to pay attention to. I would also include the Commanders game, but it's like, listen, I'm not going to talk about every potential game we need to pay attention to. I think the Steelers have the better odds rather than the Commanders of beating the Eagles. So Steelers versus Eagles, that's number one. Or Steelers at Eagles, pardon me. Game number 2 we need to pay attention to, which I don't see any chance in hell why as Lions fan you wouldn't be paying attention to this. It's the Bills game that we've got coming up. And I'll tell you why that this game is crucial. It's not just crucial because of the fact that it is a literal Super Bowl preview. Because if you think about it, that is exactly how this game is going to be billed going into it. Hey, the Bills, they are considered the second best team by record, and they are also considered maybe the best team by talent in the AFC. Well, if you also take a look at the situation for what it is, there's not been an actual heavyweight Super Bowl battle between two teams of opposite conferences this year. This is going to be the first game between two Super Bowl favorites from opposite conferences that's going to play this year. So it's going to get hyped up. There's going to be a lot of anticipation for this game. It's going to get a lot of freaking billing and narratives thrown at it. And again, you're going to have people talking about the quarterbacks, Goff v. Allen. You're going to have people talking about the Lions defense going up against the Bills offense and vice versa for the Lions offense versus the Bills defense. This game is huge from that perspective because it is a potential preview of what the Super Bowl could be this year. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the Lions handle that. That's number one. But also, number 2, in order to secure the NFC number 1 seed, it's not solely dependent upon what your conference record is. That is second to what your overall record is. So the Lions have to continue to win if they want to get that number 1 seed spot. Which means even though the Bills are an AFC conference opponent, they are still very crucial to this entire freaking equation to us getting the number 1 seed. So not only is this game huge because of the fact it's a potential Super Bowl preview of the Bills versus the Lions, or the Bills at the Lions, pardon me, it's also huge because we have to win it if we want to make sure we maintain our edge in getting to the freaking number 1 seed. Because the way I look at it is the Lions can only realistically lose one more game and still be reasonably, and I say that, heavy emphasis, reasonably comfortable to get the number 1 seed. So that's game number 2. Game number 3, like I said, is in week 17. And this is another big matchup because of 2 main reasons. It's the Packers at the Vikings. This game is huge for 2 reasons. One, it's going to help the Lions potentially secure not only the division championship, but also their potential to get the number 1 seed. Let's think about this, folks. The Vikings are vying for the division championship just as much as the Lions are right now. So that means, ooh, I hate saying this. That means for week 17, us Lions fans, grit your teeth and bear it, but we're going to have to be Packers fans. We're going to have to cheer the Pack turds because it's like, the only real team other than us that can realistically beat the freaking Vikings at this point is the Packers. So for me, it's like, okay, as much as I don't want to, as much as it sickens and turns my stomach, we got to cheer the Packers on to beat the Vikings because if the Packers beat the Vikings, that at that point means we've locked up the division title. Because I guarantee you this, we will most likely freaking destroy the 49ers because we've got a vendetta with their name on it from last year. And if we win and the Vikings lose, that's it. They're done. They can't secure the division title over us at that point. And then on top of that, depending upon how the next few weeks prior to that go, they'll probably be also out of the number 1 seed title. That's why I'm saying by week 17, the Lions could have everything locked up. They could have the division title. They could have the conference number 1 seed. They could have everything if everything I'm predicting comes to pass. That's why I'm saying week 17 is a huge week for the Lions because it's like, listen, you get to exact revenge on the 49ers. You have to freaking cheer the Packers to win against the Vikings so that way you can lock up the division title and you can lock up the number 1 seed for the playoffs. It's a big, big game. It's a big week. But then there's the final game. And this is if, for whatever reason, everything I'm predicting literally falls apart. And I'm telling you this right now. I don't want this to happen, but if it does, man, oh man, you want to talk about a way to close out the season, this would be the way to do it. you have a sudden death, winner takes all NFC North Division title game, which is the Vikings coming home to the Lions to play us for the NFC North Division title. Because think about that. Depending upon what happens in the 3 games I just talked about, if everything I said completely just goes to hell in a handbasket, it could be entirely possible that the Lions will have to face the Vikings at the very end of the year for the division title and maybe also for the conference title as far as getting that number 1 seed. So again, whether or not the Steelers or the Commanders are able to get one over on the Eagles, whether or not, the Bills are able, whether or not we're able to beat the Bills and also, the 49ers and all that nonsense. Again, this potential last game could be something important. That's why I keep saying throughout this entire process, the Lions can reasonably afford to lose one more game and still be somewhat comfortable to win not only the division, but the number 1 seed. That's why I'm saying, if the Lions do lose one more game, the only game I'm realistically worried about is the Bears. Other than that, I'm not really worried. I am not worried about the 49ers. I'm not really worried about the Bills. And I'll tell you why I'm not worried about the Bills in another episode. But if it all comes down to it, this game in Week 18 against the Vikings, that would be the literal sudden death matchup of who's going to get the freaking division title and potentially the number 1 seed going into the playoffs. You want to talk about everything out on the line? You want to talk about a potential just absolute crazy atmosphere? This would literally be that game. I don't want it to be that type of a game. I literally don't want it to come down to, okay, we're literally on a teeter-totter here, and the fulcrum of that teeter-totter is who gets number 1 seed going into the playoffs and who wins the NFC North Division title. I don't want that. I would much rather, by week 16, 17, we've got that crap locked up and we don't have to worry about it. But I'm just simply saying, if all does not come to pass like I think it will, this is the game that everybody's going to be paying attention to. I guarantee you it. I guarantee you it. But anyway, I just wanted to talk about this because I don't think anyone really has as of yet, because everybody's more focused on what's going on within the individual weeks. But I'm telling you this right now. This is stuff we've really got to start thinking about, because these next couple of weeks, they are going to have a hell of a lot of weight and importance as to what goes into this playoff equation we're getting ready for. But anyway, having said that, I'm going to end this episode and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of MCM Motor City Mania. If you like what you saw, by all means, I highly encourage y'all to watch the next episode. Also encourage y'all to do one of these 3 things: like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. If by chance you subscribed in the past and you forgot to do so at the time, I want to highly encourage y'all to please make sure you hit that bell notification icon so that you guys never miss any more content that I push out. Also want to encourage y'all to share the content with your Lions friends and family members. Share here on YouTube, share it on Twitter, share it on Facebook, share anywhere and everywhere you possibly can, because the more we can do that, the greater the channel can grow and spread. And with that being said, my friends, whether or not this is your first time viewing me or you've been viewing me for a long time, I hope y'all got something out of the content. I hope y'all enjoyed the content. I also hope that there's something in your life that makes you happy and makes you smile. God bless, my friends, and until the next time we meet, I'll see you all in the next episode.